I returned early from my volunteer trip, hoping to surprise Nancy with flowers like I used to. Instead, the house greeted me with complete darkness. Then came a soft, desperate pounding from beneath my feet. When I broke the padlock on the basement door, the sight inside shattered me. Nancy, my Nancy, was lying on the concrete, dehydrated, confused, shaking. Someone had left her there to die slowly, and that someone was my daughter Sienna. She thought I'd never find out. But she didn't understand one thing: when you try to harm the woman I've loved for 42 years, you unleash a storm. What happened next exposed a truth no parent should ever face. Tell me where you're watching from and the time right now. Your comment might help another family stay safe. I pulled my dusty pickup into the familiar driveway of our Scottsdale home, the desert air finally cooling as the Arizona sun dipped behind the McDowell Mountains. 7 days in Boston had been exhausting, but deeply rewarding. The charity project building affordable homes for 3 families who'd lost everything in a fire reminded me why I'd gone into civil engineering in the first place. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the anticipation of seeing Nancy again. The house sat in complete darkness. That stopped me cold. Nancy always kept the living room lights on, especially since her Alzheimer's diagnosis 2 years ago. Routine was everything for her now. I grabbed my duffel bag from the truck bed, my boots crunching on the gravel as I approached our front door. Sienna's Honda wasn't in the driveway either, which struck me as odd. She'd promised to stay with her mother the entire week. That's when I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere inside the house. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for my keys. The tapping was desperate, almost Morse code-like, but weak. So terribly weak. I shoved the key into the lock and burst through the front door, calling out Nancy's name. The sound was clearer now, coming from below, from the basement. I'd never run down those stairs so fast in my life. The basement door was padlocked shut with a heavy-duty master lock I'd never seen before, the kind they use on storage units. The tapping grew more frantic as I approached, accompanied by a muffled voice that made my blood run cold. "Nancy!" I shouted, my hands shaking as I searched for something, anything to break that damned lock. A weak cry answered from the other side. I sprinted to the garage, grabbed the crowbar from my toolbox, and attacked that lock with 3 violent yanks. The metal gave way with a sharp crack, and the door swung open. The smell hit me first, urine sweat, and something sour that I couldn't identify. I flicked on the light switch and nearly collapsed. Nancy lay at the bottom of the concrete stairs, her frail body curled on the cold floor. A thin camping blanket was her only comfort. In the corner sat a plastic bucket that I didn't want to think about. Her pink nightgown, the one I'd bought her for Christmas, was stained and torn. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding, her eyes unfocused and glassy. She looked up at me with the confusion of someone who'd been lost in darkness for far too long. "Bruce," her voice was barely a whisper, like autumn leaves scraping across pavement. I was down those stairs in seconds, scooping her into my arms. She weighed nothing. How long had she been down here? How long without food, without water, without her heart medication? "I'm here, sweetheart. I've got you. You're safe now." My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, cradling Nancy against my chest as I carried her upstairs. She felt so fragile, like a bird with broken wings. The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from underwater as I gave our address, my mind reeling with questions I couldn't yet process. As the distant wail of sirens grew closer, I looked around our home with new eyes. Everything seemed different somehow. The furniture had been moved slightly. Nancy's weekly pill organizer was missing from the kitchen counter. Family photos had been turned face down. But it was Nancy's next words that turned my blood to ice water. She looked up at me with those beautiful brown eyes that had captivated me for 42 years, eyes now filled with confusion and pain, and whispered, "Bruce, Sienna said you'd abandon me forever." The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, checking Nancy's vitals as I sat helpless in the back of the ambulance. Her pulse was weak but steady, they told me. Dehydrated, malnourished. The younger EMT, a woman with kind eyes, kept Nancy talking during the ride to Phoenix General. "What's your name, honey?" "Nancy. Nancy Parker." Her voice was still that fragile whisper. "And who's this handsome man holding your hand?" Nancy turned toward me, squinting as if trying to bring me into focus. That's my Bruce. He came back." The way she said it, like she genuinely believed I never would send a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, pulled me aside while the nurses got Nancy settled. Mr. Parker, your wife, is suffering from severe dehydration and what appears to be several days without her heart medication. When did you last see her taking her pills? 7 days ago before I left for Boston. My daughter Sienna was supposed to be managing her medications. Dr. Martinez made a note on her chart. We'll need to monitor her closely tonight. The combination of missed cardiac medication and dehydration could have been fatal if you'd found her much later. Fatal. The word hit me like a physical blow. I spent that night in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Nancy's bed, listening to the steady beep of monitors and watching her sleep fitfully. Every few hours she'd wake up confused, asking where Sienna was, why the room looked different when we were going home. I'd hold her hand and tell her everything was going to be okay, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The next morning, after Nancy had eaten some breakfast and seemed more alert, I drove back to Scottsdale to gather some of her things. The desert sun was already brutal at 8 a.m., promising another scorching day, but our house felt cold when I walked inside. Something was wrong. Not just the basement horror, something else. I stood in our living room trying to identify what felt different. The couch had been moved 6 inches to the left. Nancy's favorite reading lamp was unplugged. The family photos on the mantel had been rearranged, some missing entirely. In the kitchen, Nancy's weekly pill organizer, the one with compartments for morning and evening doses, was nowhere to be found. I climbed the stairs to gather Nancy's clothes and toiletries, but stopped at Sienna's childhood bedroom. The door stood wide open, which was unusual. Sienna always kept it closed when she visited, saying it felt weird sleeping in her old room. Now I could see why it was open. The room looked like a tornado had hit it. Dresser drawers hung open clothes scattered across the unmade bed. Her closet was half-empty hangers askew. On the nightstand I found a crumpled boarding pass, stub Phoenix to Boston, dated 3 days ago. But that made no sense. She was supposed to be here caring for Nancy. I was about to leave when I noticed something on the kitchen table that made my stomach drop. Sienna's laptop sat open, the screen still glowing. She'd left in such a hurry that she hadn't even shut it down. The password screen wasn't there, she was already logged in. The browser showed multiple tabs, and as I got closer, I could see they weren't shopping sites or social media. They were banking websites, Wells Fargo, Chase, American Express. And there were notification emails in her inbox with subject lines that made my hands shake. Wire transfer confirmation, account access granted, loan approval notice. I stared at the laptop screen, my cursor hovering over the Wells Fargo login page like a weapon I wasn't sure I wanted to fire. The afternoon sun streamed through our kitchen window, casting long shadows across the granite countertop where Sienna used her homework 20 years ago. Now that same surface held evidence of something I couldn't yet bring myself to believe. My hands trembled as I clicked through her browser history. Legal document websites, power of attorney forms, notary services in Tempe. Each click felt like peeling back layers of my daughter's deception, revealing something rotten underneath. The first document I found made my stomach lurch. A scanned power of attorney form dated 5 days ago, right in the middle of my Boston trip. Nancy's signature was there at the bottom, shaky but recognizable. The notary stamp belonged to someone called Desert Legal Services, an address I'd never heard of in a strip mall across town. The document gave Sienna complete authority over Nancy's financial affairs. I kept digging. Bank statements filled the screen like evidence in a crime scene. Our Wells Fargo savings account, the one Nancy and I had built over 30 years of careful planning, showed a withdrawal of $95,000. The entire balance gone in a single electronic transfer 6 days ago. But that wasn't all. A home equity line of credit application had been approved and funded for $125,000. Our house, the one we'd owned free and clear for 15 years, was now mortgaged again. The loan documents bore Nancy's forged signature and Sienna's witness signature, both notarized by the same strip mall operation. Every penny, $220,000 of our life savings and home equity, had been transferred to something called Thornhill Capital Management, LLC. 3 more clicks revealed that Thornhill Capital was registered to Austin Clark, Sienna's husband, with a business address that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. The company was only 6 months old, incorporated the same week Austin had started talking about exciting investment opportunities at family dinners. My daughter and her husband had systematically looted our life savings. The email drafts folder told an even darker story. Flight confirmations for Phoenix Sky Harbor to London Heathrow, then connecting to Lisbon. Departure date this weekend. Two passengers, Sienna and Austin Clark, one-way tickets. But it was the text message thread between them that made me physically sick. Austin timeline moved up. Old lady asking too many questions. Sienna handled. Package secured in basement. No more questions. Austin, what if someone checks on her? Sienna, who dad's in Boston building houses for strangers while his own family falls apart? Mom's friends stopped visiting months ago. We're golden. Austin and after. Sienna, natural causes. Alzheimer's patients wander off all the time, or fall downstairs. Accidents happen. I had to grip the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. They hadn't just stolen our money. They'd planned to let Nancy die in that basement and claim it was an accident. A confused elderly woman with dementia found too late by her grieving husband who'd been away doing charity work. The final email draft unsent, but saved, contained their exit strategy. Package secured. Liability contained. Departure confirmed. See you on the other side. Package. That's what they called my wife. Nancy, who'd raised Sienna, who'd sacrificed her own career to support our daughter through college, who still asked about Sienna every day despite her failing memory. She was just a package to be contained. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking so badly I could barely operate the mouse. Bank records, text messages, flight confirmations, incorporation documents. Evidence of a betrayal so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it all at once. $220,000. 42 years of marriage. A daughter I'd loved unconditionally. All of it gone. My hands shook as I dialed the Phoenix Police Department, the screenshots of Sienna's betrayal still glowing on the laptop screen beside me. The phone rang twice before a dispatcher answered with professional efficiency. Phoenix Police, how can I help you? I need to report elder abuse and financial exploitation, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. My wife was locked in our basement for days while our daughter stole our life savings. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Detective Maria Davis in a sterile conference room at the Elder Abuse Unit. Davis was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had clearly seen too much human cruelty. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire nightmare from finding Nancy in the basement to discovering the systematic theft of our accounts. Mr. Parker, I'm going to need you to walk me through this timeline very carefully, Davis said, pulling out a digital recorder. Start with when you left for Boston. I told her everything. The charity project, Sienna volunteering to stay with Nancy, the daily phone calls that had stopped after the first week. Davis took notes in a precise shorthand, occasionally asking for clarification on dates or amounts. You said $220,000 total. 95 from savings, 125 from a home equity loan I never authorized. Davis whistled low. That's felony financial exploitation, combined with the unlawful confinement. She shook her head. Mr. Parker, your daughter is looking at serious prison time. We drove to my house in separate cars. Davis photographed everything: the basement, the broken padlock, the bucket Nancy had been forced to use. She documented the laptop evidence, methodically making copies of bank records, screenshots of text messages, flight confirmations. Her camera flash illuminated corners of our home that suddenly felt foreign and violated. This power of attorney, Davis said, examining the forged document. Desert Legal Services, we've had complaints about them before. Strip mall operation, asked very few questions about mental capacity. She called our bank from my kitchen, identifying herself as law enforcement. Within minutes, she'd frozen our remaining accounts and flagged any pending transfers. Then she ran Austin Clark through the police database. Interesting, she murmured, studying her computer screen. Your son-in-law has been busy. 3 different LLCs registered in the past 6 months. Thornhill Capital Desert Investment Group and something called Phoenix Retirement Solutions. She looked up at me. Mr. Parker, I think your family might not be his only targets. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Austin's smooth talk about cryptocurrency investments, his sudden interest in Nancy's retirement planning, the way he'd started asking pointed questions about our financial situation at family dinners. We need to move fast, Davis said, reaching for her phone. If they're planning to leave this weekend, we have maybe 48 hours to build a case and get warrants. She made a series of rapid calls. Airport security, Customs and Border Protection, the district attorney's office. I listened to her speak in law enforcement shorthand, coordinating what sounded like a complex operation. Detective Davis, I said when she finished, what happens if they get on that plane? Portugal doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. for financial crimes, she admitted. If they make it to Lisbon, getting them back becomes a lot more complicated. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and her expression tightened. Davis here. She listened for a moment, then grabbed her keys. When? Another pause. Are you sure about the timing? She hung up and looked at me with the focused intensity of a predator who'd just spotted prey. Mr. Parker, we need to move fast. That was airport security. Your daughter and son-in-law just checked in for tonight's red-eye to London. They moved up their departure. Detective Davis weaved through Phoenix rush-hour traffic like a woman possessed, her unmarked Crown Victoria's siren wailing as we raced towards Sky Harbor International Airport. I gripped the passenger seat, watching the desert landscape blur past in the dying light of another scorching Arizona day. Airport security is coordinating with TSA, Davis shouted over the siren, her phone pressed to her ear. They're holding the flight, but we've got maybe 20 minutes before this becomes an international incident. She barked orders into her radio, coordinating with what sounded like half the law enforcement agencies in Maricopa County. Airport police, Customs and Border Protection, even FBI, since this was now a federal case involving wire fraud and interstate flight to avoid prosecution. We screeched into the airport's law enforcement parking area, Davis flashing her badge at security checkpoints as we ran through the terminal. Sky Harbor was packed with evening travelers' families heading home from vacations, business people catching red-eyes to the East Coast. None of them had any idea they were about to witness a takedown. Terminal 4, Gate A12. Davis panted as we jogged past shops and restaurants. British Airways flight to London Heathrow. Through the terminal's massive windows, I could see planes taxiing on the runway, their lights blinking against the purple desert sunset. Somewhere in this crowd were my daughter and the man who'd helped her try to murder my wife. Davis's radio crackled. Detective, we've got eyes on both suspects. Female subject just cleared security checkpoint. Male subject is 30 yards behind her, trying to maintain distance. We reached the security area where TSA supervisor Janet Martinez was coordinating with airport police. She pointed to monitors showing feeds from various security cameras throughout the terminal. There, she said, indicating a figure on screen. Austin Clark just picked up his carry-on from the X-ray machine, and there's Sienna Clark already at the gate area. I stared at the grainy security footage of my daughter. Even on the low-resolution monitor, I could see her checking her phone obsessively, her eyes scanning the terminal like a hunted animal. She'd changed her haircut short and dyed blonde, but I'd know that nervous gesture anywhere. She used to do the same thing during high school when she'd broken curfew. Subject Austin appears agitated. Came another radio update. Excessive sweating, keeps looking over his shoulder. He's approaching the gate now. Davis positioned herself where she could see the gate through the security checkpoint. Mr. Parker, I need you to stay back here with Supervisor Martinez. This could get ugly. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the boarding process begin. Business class passengers were called first, then premium economy. Austin had reached the gate area and was sitting as far from Sienna as possible, both of them pretending not to know each other. Now boarding all passengers for British Airways Flight 288 to London Heathrow, came the announcement over the terminal's PA system. That's when everything happened at once. Austin stood up first, joining the line of passengers presenting their boarding passes. He was sweating profusely now, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his phone. Sienna waited until the line had moved forward, before casually walking over, still maintaining the pretense that they weren't traveling together. All units move in, Davis commanded into her radio. Airport police officers emerged from positions I hadn't even noticed they'd taken. TSA agents stepped forward as Austin handed over his boarding pass. The gate agent, clearly briefed on the situation, smiled and took the document. Austin Clark, the TSA agent said calmly. Austin's face went white. Yes. Sienna Clark. Another agent approached my daughter. For just a moment, Sienna's mask slipped. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the split-second decision between fight and flight. Then she did something that chilled me to the bone. She smiled. Officers, there seems to be some mistake, she said in the sweet, reasonable voice she'd used to talk her way out of trouble since childhood. You're both under arrest, the lead officer announced, producing handcuffs. That's when Austin bolted. He shoved past a family with small children sprinting toward the jetway. Airport police tackled him before he made it 10 feet, his body hitting the terminal floor with a sickening thud. Other passengers screamed and scattered. Sienna, meanwhile, had started shouting. This is harassment police brutality. Someone call the media. She was playing to the crowd, trying to create a scene that would complicate the arrest. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire terminal. As officers led them away, Sienna turned toward the security camera she somehow knew was watching. Her expression was pure, concentrated hatred. Not the face of someone wrongly accused, but the look of a predator whose hunt had been interrupted. The Maricopa County Courthouse buzzed with news vans and reporters as I entered courtroom 4B. The story had exploded overnight. Daughter locks, Alzheimer's mother in basement, while stealing life savings made national headlines. Sienna and Austin shuffled in wearing orange jumpsuits and shackles, neither looking at me. Judge Elena Martinez, a stern woman with silver hair, called court to order. The state of Arizona versus Sienna Clark and Austin Clark, arraignment hearing. The charges sounded worse, read aloud. Elder abuse of a vulnerable adult, financial exploitation, unlawful imprisonment, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy and forgery. Austin faced additional charges for operating an unlicensed investment scheme. Prosecutor Maria Gonzalez addressed the court with confidence. Your Honor, defendants engaged in a calculated scheme to exploit Mrs. Nancy Parker's diminished capacity. They forged documents, drained her accounts, and locked her in a basement without food, water, or medication. Sienna's attorney, Robert Wilson, objected. Your Honor, my client has no criminal record. She's a licensed CPA with community ties. This appears to be a family dispute escalated by caregiving stress. A family dispute. Maria's voice rose. Your client was boarding an international flight when arrested. We have texts discussing letting the victim die of natural causes. This was attempted murder. Judge Martinez reviewed evidence packets, hospital photos, text messages, bank records, flight confirmations to a non-extradition country. Her expression darkened with each page. Wilson requested reasonable bail, citing employment and community ties. Family responsibilities. Maria stood. She locked her mother in a basement, stole $220,000 from a dementia patient, and planned to flee while letting her victim die. The gallery was packed with families I didn't recognize. An elderly woman in front clutched tissues while her son comforted her. They looked like they had their own story. Austin's public defender made half-hearted cooperation arguments, but even he seemed defeated. Judge Martinez looked directly at both defendants. The court has reviewed the evidence. These are serious charges involving vulnerable victims and sophisticated planning. Defendants were apprehended boarding international flights to a country with limited extradition. She paused, letting her words settle. The court finds clear evidence defendants pose flight risk and danger to the community, particularly elderly and vulnerable individuals. Bail is denied. Defendants remain in custody pending trial. The gavel echoed through the packed courtroom. As officers led them away, Sienna turned back. For a moment I thought I saw regret in her eyes. Then she was gone. Outside, the Arizona sun was brutal. I was processing what happened when Channel 12 reporter Sarah Williams approached with a microphone. Mr. Parker, our investigation suggests your daughter and son-in-law targeted other elderly victims. How many other families do you think are involved? The question hit like a physical blow. Other families, other Nancys, other basements. How many more were there? 2 months after the arraignment, Austin's public defender approached Maria Gonzalez with an offer that would change everything. My client wants to cooperate, the lawyer said during a meeting in the prosecutor's conference room. Full testimony against Sienna Clark in exchange for a reduced sentence. I sat behind one-way glass, watching Austin break down as he detailed the conspiracy. Gone was the smooth-talking cryptocurrency expert who'd charmed our family dinners. This was a broken man facing the reality of what he'd helped orchestrate. Sienna planned everything, Austin said, his voice barely above a whisper. She spent months researching elder abuse laws, power of attorney requirements, which notaries wouldn't ask too many questions. She timed it perfectly with your Boston trip. Maria leaned forward. And Mrs. Parker's condition in the basement, Austin's hands shook. Sienna said Nancy wouldn't last much longer anyway with the Alzheimer's. She said we were just accelerating the inevitable. The words hit me like physical blows. My daughter had planned my wife's death with the cold calculation of an accountant balancing books. She found other targets, too. Austin continued. Through her CPA firm, she identified elderly clients with substantial assets and cognitive decline. Nancy was just the first. 4 months later, Superior Court was packed for the trial. National media had turned the case into a symbol of elder abuse in America. I sat in the front row as Nancy took the witness stand, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing courtroom. "Mrs. Parker," Maria said gently, "can you tell us about the basement?" Nancy's voice was fragile but clear. "So cold. So dark. I called for Sienna, but she didn't come. I thought Bruce had left me forever." Her confusion was evident. She mixed up dates, forgot details, but her pain was unmistakable. When she described using the bucket as a toilet, 2 jurors visibly wiped their eyes. "Nancy," Maria continued, "do you know why you were in the basement?" My wife looked directly at Sienna for the first time since the trial began. "Sienna said I was bad, that I was a burden. But I don't understand why she would hurt me. I love her so much." The courtroom fell silent. Even Sienna's attorney, Robert Wilson, looked stricken. Austin took the stand next, his testimony methodical and devastating. He detailed every step of their scheme, researching Nancy's medical records, timing the fraud with my absence, planning their escape to Portugal. But it was his description of Sienna's mindset that sealed her fate. "She called Nancy the package," Austin testified. "She said elderly people with dementia die all the time, and no one questions it if they're found too late." The prosecution's final piece of evidence was the basement video. Detective Davis had recorded the scene exactly as I'd found it. The concrete floor, the thin blanket, the bucket, the scratches on the door where Nancy had tried to claw her way out. The courtroom watched in horrified silence. Several jurors were openly crying. One had to excuse himself briefly. Sienna's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. Wilson tried to argue mental health issues, claimed Austin had manipulated her, suggested the stress of caregiving had caused a breakdown. But the text messages, the meticulous planning, the months of preparation all pointed to cold, calculated greed. During closing arguments, Maria addressed the jury with quiet intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't just about one family's tragedy. It's about whether we as a society will protect our most vulnerable members or allow them to be exploited by those they trust most." Wilson's closing was half-hearted at best. Even he seemed to understand the futility of defending the indefensible. The jury deliberated for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces told the story before any words were spoken. The foreman, a middle-aged construction worker, held the verdict with steady hands. Nancy sat beside me in the gallery, her hand in mine. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was important. She kept asking if Sienna would come home soon. Judge Martinez called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, his voice clear and strong. "We have your honor. We, the jury, find the defendant, Sienna Clark, guilty on all counts." The words echoed through the packed courtroom like a thunderclap. I felt Nancy's hand tighten in mine as the foreman continued reading the verdict. Guilty of elder abuse. Guilty of financial exploitation. Guilty of unlawful imprisonment. Guilty on every single charge. Sienna's face remained stone cold as the verdict was read, but I saw her hands tremble slightly. Austin, who had already entered his guilty plea in exchange for cooperation, sat with his head bowed. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. Judge Martinez had clearly given this case considerable thought. The courtroom was once again packed with families, advocates, and media representatives. Before I imposed sentence, Judge Martinez said, "The court will hear victim impact statements." I walked to the podium carrying a letter Nancy and I had written together during her clearer moments. My voice shook as I read her words. "My name is Nancy Parker. I may have Alzheimer's, but I remember being cold and scared in that dark basement. I remember calling for my daughter, not understanding why she wouldn't help me. Sienna was supposed to love me, protect me. Instead, she treated me like I was already dead. But I'm still here. I'm still someone's wife, someone's mother. I still matter." Other families spoke too, elderly, victims of Austin's investment schemes, their children describing life savings, lost retirement dreams, shattered. The scope of their crimes had grown beyond anything I'd initially imagined. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Martinez's words were measured but fierce. "Ms. Clark, you exploited the most vulnerable person in your life, your own mother afflicted with a degenerative disease that required your compassion, not your cruelty. You systematically stole her life savings, forged legal documents, and locked her in conditions that could have killed her. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. This was calculated, premeditated abuse of the highest order." She paused, looking directly at Sienna. "The sentence of this court is 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. You will also pay full restitution of $220,000 plus medical expenses. Austin received 12 years with parole eligibility after 8 contingent on continued cooperation with ongoing investigations into other victims. As the gavel fell for the final time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Nancy and I drove home to Scottsdale in comfortable silence, the desert landscape looking somehow brighter than it had in ages. Our house, which had felt violated and foreign after Sienna's crimes, was slowly becoming home again. I'd installed a comprehensive security system and hired Maria Santos, a wonderful part-time caregiver who helped Nancy with her medications and daily routines. Nancy was responding well to proper treatment, her confusion had decreased, and she was sleeping through the night again. The financial damage was severe. We'd never recover the stolen money despite the restitution order. I'd had to take a part-time consulting job to help with expenses, but we were managing, and more importantly, we were together. The case had sparked something larger than our personal tragedy. The Arizona legislature passed new elder protection laws. Community groups organized to check on isolated seniors. Detective Davis told me that Austin's cooperation had led to the identification of dozens of other victims across multiple states. One evening, as Nancy and I sat on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the McDowell Mountains, purple and gold, she turned to me with unusual clarity. "Bruce," she said, "I know I don't always remember things clearly anymore, but I remember that you came back for me. You saved me." "We saved each other," I replied, squeezing her hand. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since that terrible night. "Sienna made a mistake, didn't she? She thought love could be stolen like money. But it can't." As darkness settled over the desert and the first stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, I reflected on everything we'd endured. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed something important. When evil targets the vulnerable, ordinary people can become extraordinary advocates for justice. Nancy dozed in her chair, her breathing steady and peaceful. We'd survived the unthinkable. Justice had prevailed, and our love, tested by the worst kind of betrayal, had endured. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. Looking back on everything we endured, I can finally admit how many warning signs I missed, mistakes that almost cost Nancy her life. Please don't repeat what I did. Don't place blind trust in anyone, even in your own blood. I should have spoken to Nancy directly every day instead of depending on Sienna's cheerful updates. I should have asked neighbors to check on her arranged weekly wellness visits and protected our financial accounts with stronger safeguards. Stories like mine aren't rare anymore. In fact, what you're hearing is just one of countless grandpa stories happening quietly across America. This true story is a painful reminder that elder abuse often comes from the very people we think would care the most. The statistics don't lie. 1 in every 10 seniors is abused, and nearly 90% of the time the abuser is a family member. I believe God allowed me to come home early that day, guided me straight to the basement where Nancy lay suffering. Through the detectives, nurses, and advocates who helped us, I realized God places the right people in our path exactly when we need them. They were the protectors we didn't know we needed. If you're caring for elderly parents, I hope this true story pushes you to build strong safeguards. Never rely on a single caregiver. Keep banking oversight separate. Stay present in your loved ones' lives, even if you're far away. Not every smiling family member carries pure intentions, especially when money or inheritance is involved. The only reason Nancy and I survived this nightmare is because ordinary people stepped up with extraordinary courage. And that's why I'm sharing this, because grandpa stories like ours can protect someone else's mother, father, or grandparent. God has a purpose in every dark season, and sometimes he turns our suffering into a shield for others. If this true story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep spreading grandpa stories that warn, protect, and save lives.